Everybody, welcome back to another video with Shifty's 49ers Talk. In today's video, we're going to discuss the relatively breaking news that the San Francisco 49ers have hired Gus Bradley to join the defensive staff here in San Francisco. I think he's going to be a wonderful addition to Robert Saleh's staff. We're going to talk all about it, but first, let's run the intro. It was announced today by Tom Pelissero that the 49ers have hired Gus Bradley, and I think immediate reaction is this is a fantastic move for the San Francisco 49ers. Gus Bradley is going to be an assistant coach on the defensive side of the ball, but he brings just so much experience as a defensive coordinator, even as a head coach. When you look at his background, 12 years as a defensive coordinator in the NFL, started out with the Seattle Seahawks back in 2009, was there till 2012 during the just the beginning of that Legion of Boom era in Seattle that was just so widely successful. And that's a big reason why he then got the head coaching job with the Jacksonville Jaguars and did okay there. He was there for 4 years. And then when he got fired in 2016, since then, from 2017 up until now, he's basically been a defensive coordinator. So he has a ton of experience calling plays. He's not going to be doing that in San Francisco, but I think he just brings so much experience that's maybe going to help Robert Saleh out. Now, you might argue that Robert Saleh doesn't need the help. He's a really, really good defensive coordinator in his own right, but it never hurts to have another guide to maybe bounce ideas off. What can we do in these situations? Maybe Gus Bradley, from his experience, he could maybe develop himself to kind of be a better defensive play caller. He's been a defensive coordinator for most of his career and a head coach, that maybe he can kind of step back and reanalyze things, not having the weight of responsibility of a defensive coordinator. So I think it brings some really good opportunities, and I think it's just a great addition. And when you compare this defensive coaching staff, Robert Saleh, Gus Bradley, to Nick Sorensen and Brandon Staley, I think it's just completely night and day. And even though we haven't even officially reached the end of the season yet, I just can't be more excited for where this defense is going. So when we look at Gus Bradley, the cool thing is he actually has some familiarity with Robert Saleh. In the past, Gus Bradley was actually Robert Saleh's boss. When Gus Bradley was the defensive coordinator in Seattle, Robert Saleh was on the staff as a linebackers coach. Then Gus Bradley hires Robert Saleh in Jacksonville, and that's where Saleh was before he was hired to San Francisco as the DC back in 2017. So they get to have like a reunion, and I think that's just such a cool thing that these guys, they know that they can work together. And clearly Gus Bradley has a lot of faith in Saleh, and obviously vice versa. Robert Saleh has a ton of faith in Gus Bradley. So I think that's a really awesome thing to have. And when you also look at it, where it could be really beneficial for the 49ers. So when I looked at the hiring of Robert Saleh, I think he was the best DC out there. The one concern is, does he get hired as a head coach next offseason, or maybe in 2 off seasons? And I think that Gus Bradley could be a natural successor to Robert Saleh. I think that could absolutely happen. Let's say next offseason, Saleh gets hired somewhere as the head coach. You have a guy who would be familiar with not only the coaching staff, but with the players, and he has a ton of experience. So that could be a natural transition if that happens. Otherwise, maybe 2 or 3 years if Robert Saleh's here, potentially as a KJ Wright. Could he be hired as a defensive coordinator, kind of follow in that D'Amico Ryans type role and move up to a defensive coordinator? And you could still have a Gus Bradley who could be just a confidant for a guy like KJ Wright. Also, that's another connection. KJ Wright and Gus Bradley together in Seattle. So just so many things coming full circle, and which tends to happen in the NFL. But I really do just like the addition of Gus Bradley, and it's going to help out, I think, just make things a lot easier and run really, really smoothly. The final thing, which I do like a lot about this too, is that let's look at maybe some of the free agents that Gus Bradley worked with while he was in Indianapolis, who could come over to the San Francisco 49ers. Now, I'm going to focus on the defensive side because that's what he coached. I'm sure in the locker room he'd be familiar with some of the offensive guys. But if you look at it, the first guy that sticks out to me is, could he persuade a guy like safety Julian Blackmon to come over to the San Francisco 49ers? Blackmon, over the last 2 years, he has 7 interceptions. He's clearly a playmaker, and that's something that the 49ers defense sorely lacked last season with Nick Sorensen, that just didn't make enough turnovers, didn't force enough turnovers, no big game-changing plays, or where there were some, but just not nearly enough. So he's a guy, could he maybe change that? Ideally, yes, we bring back Talanoa Hufanga, but if we can't afford him, could we maybe get a guy like Julian Blackmon, who will still cost a bit of money for sure, but maybe a little bit more affordable than a guy like Hufanga, and potentially just as good. And a guy like Gus Bradley, he'll have the inside scoop on what kind of player Blackmon is. Another guy that we could potentially look at is linebacker EJ Speed. He played over 80% of the snaps last season for the Colts. Depending on what happens with Dre Greenlaw, I absolutely want Dre back, and I think he will be back, but maybe we sign a guy just to have a little bit of insurance, just in case Dre maybe can't go full speed all of the time and maybe has to be somewhat limited in snaps. This could be similar to what we thought we were getting when we signed Devondre Campbell, but I think EJ Speed, he's played a ton of snaps. He knows the scheme that Gus Bradley, and thus a very similar scheme to Robert Saleh. Robert Saleh and this whole scheme relies so much on the linebackers to be effective that if there is anything that comes up with Greenlaw, you have a guy who has experience playing in this type of a scheme. Other two guys, which I'll touch on very quickly, you have Taven Bryan, interior defensive lineman, former first-round pick, has been consistently healthy. One of those guys, part of a rotation, I think wouldn't be a bad idea, but I still think that you want that stud defensive lineman in the middle. But again, you gotta have depth in the NFL, and this could be a very solid, reasonably priced signing in Taven Bryan. And finally, Deo Odeyingbo. He's an edge player for the Indianapolis Colts. Last season, only 3 sacks. The year before that had 8. So is something that maybe could, if he gets a little bit more repetition, maybe a little bit more play time, you look at playing opposite of a guy like Nick Bosa, could that help him out? Again, a depth signing, but could be something valuable. Again, Gus Bradley will have the scoop on a lot of these guys, having coached some of these guys for the last, 3-4 years. So there is some valuable insights there. But overall, I'm going to leave it there, guys. Just want to say, super pumped about this move. Love the direction that the 49ers are going this offseason, really attacking it, seeing that we had a weakness, and let's turn that weakness into a strength. Now, there's so much more work to be done, of course. You're going to have the combine coming up, free agency, the draft, all of that, which we're going to cover. But I think so far, so good. The Niners are really acing this offseason. And I'm going to leave it there. Let me know your thoughts on hiring of Gus Bradley, what it could mean for the 49ers defense, not only this season coming, but the seasons beyond that. I'll leave it there. Thank you so much, guys. I'm going to head on out. But before I do, I'm going to say 2 things. The butt counts, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.